Good morning, everyone. Well, it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Hanchen Wang, who is going to be giving our colloquium presentation today. Hanchen is a postdoctoral fellow, and he has actually a joint affiliation both with Stanford University as well as Genentech. And at Stanford University, he's working with Yuri Lefkovec, and at Genentech with Aviv Regev. So these are two really big leaders in the computational biology field. His research is really focused on developing computational methods to understand biological systems and advance discoveries. He has published in Nature, Science, Nature Biotechnology, just to name a few of the journals that he's published in. He received his bachelor's degree in physics from Nanjing University and his PhD from Cambridge University and Trinity College in the UK. And the title of his talk is Recipes for Building Agents for Biomedical Discovery. So Hanchen, welcome.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Okay. So today's topic is about share some observations and lenses I've learned about building biomedical agents. It's essentially highly engineering. So as you see, I put like some icons of the soup. Which essentially, there's a lot of ingredients while you're building the agents, and there's also a lot of criteria to define what is a good agent. So I want to start with the vision of our human being to do this endless pursuit of autonomy in our history. So start with steam, which essentially almost 250 years ago, and electricity, as well as silicon and the internet. And then nowadays, as the the beginning of the ChatGPT, which almost like 4 years ago, we now enter in my and many folks' view that can make a very good use of large language models for automating a lot of our daily tasks. So in the past few years, we've also seen, the paradigm of using computation for discovery has changed from building like a specific tools, such as the tools we build to use the input of the amino acids and trying to predict the structure of the protein in the 3D space. And now it's more shift from a specific tool to a more active and generic partners to our scientists that is powered by large language models that has some promising demo case that can automate or help across the different stages of discovery from, help with the observations analysis to form and to verify some hypotheses, to help design experiments, to analyze what we collect from those experiments, and to refine your observation hypothesis, so on and so on. It's more like an active partner instead of a passive tools. It will ask you questions, it will give you some advice, it's be annoying, and sometimes will hallucinate as well. So this is my experience of building the agents for biomedical discovery. So we start from building like a dedicated infrastructure for spatial biology, which essentially put some specific focus on autoimmune and cancer therapeutics. And we later on moved on to build a more general purpose agents called Biomedical. We use reinforced learning to make it better on the tasks we care about. We also show a demo case that it can use robotic arms to do the liquid handler, as well as to help with the direct evolution of the protein design. And also in the collaboration with Tony Corey's lab at Stanford Med School, as well as Vadim Gledyshev lab at Harvard Med School. Both are very well-known experts for aging. We scaling the aging hypothesis generation across the global experimental evidence. Essentially, we use the omic-based aging clocks that are collected on all the available geo objects, and we try to identify which interventions are somewhat has a large impact on the aging of both mouse models and human beings. And in the summer intern I hosted last summer, a very talented PhD student called Scheuermann from Bonenberg's lab, we essentially developed a reliable agent verification method that use tools in sequential hypothesis testing called e-statistics, trying to identify whether the current agent runs will give you more satisfying or more trivial results. And in the recent preprint we released almost 2 months ago, which essentially we released a new environment called Auditorium, which we believe to enable the agent to use the computer software beyond the coding, or in addition to the coding, will offer additional capability that can be very beneficial for imaging-centric discovery as well as the softwares for lab automations. And this is a collaboration with large team members. We just name a few at the bottom of the slide. So today's talk agenda will be very simple, very straightforward. We'll spend most of the budget about talking about what has happened in the past 2 or 3 years. We're going to have one slide to summarize what is happening now. We also have one slide to give a hint about the open problems in this field, which I don't have good solutions for every single point of them. So it starts from the, a story of the strawberry. So I still remember in the winter of 2023, when ChatGPT or OpenAI is with no doubt the leading player in the field. They ran 12 days of YouTube live stream, and they release at least one cool product every single day. And this is what they released at the beginning and the last of such, demo shows. And the first day released a model called, reasoning model called O1, and the last day released the next generation of the reasoning model called O3. So essentially you can see that they put in a lot of focus on trying to make these large language models have the capability to do in-depth thinking, to think step by step, to give a more rigorous understanding that is essentially very helpful for scientific discovery. And later on, after that, people start to, more and more people start to build like the infrastructure, like the Viper, and we now come to a shared terminology called harness, which is already used to describe the ropes and the other things we put on the house in order to make the good use of house power, to make sure that it's on the same track, it's on the heading to the destinations that we want to. So essentially I put icon and strawberry here to represent this is the infrastructure we build upon these large language models. Therefore, we wanted to make some truly useful tools for the scientists as well as to leading to a novel discovery. So there's many elements in such harness. To name a few, first is called prompt. It's essentially original stands for, the message we type to the language models, and people have been developing lots of different ways of writing such instructions or to do such interactions with the language models. So this is one of the famous examples in writing a helpful prompt is called chain of thought, which is essentially developed by folks from Google Brain almost 4 years ago. Essentially, the original version is quite simple. It's like after your message to the language model, you just add a simple short sentence called "Let's think step by step," as we show in the right here with a few examples, and then the language model will provide a more rigorous reasoning, the chain of thoughts as well, and more likely to give you the correct answer. And also later on, folks from our peer lab, from James Stowe lab, they developed some more automated, differentiated way that could update your prompt that are more helpful or easier for the language model to understand to operate on. But later on, as we notice that when the model gets smarter and smarter, such as the recent release of ChatGPT 5.6, essentially in their official guide of writing a good prompt, they essentially saying, okay, we don't want you to write more this pages long sophisticated prompts. Instead of we want our user to simplify their prompt first. This essentially happens because the model is getting smarter and smarter, and they can understand your high-level instruction much more easily than the previous skills we've been using to play with them. The second element in such harness engineering is called context engineering. So essentially, it's like when we're doing name entity recognition or annotating a cell or a gene set, usually we need to provide a description of such things we want the language model to describe. Such as when we annotate a cell, usually we need a group assignment, such as a cluster structure, cluster grouping for each cell, which cell it belongs to, and also a description for that group. So therefore, the language model can give some functional description of such group. Or in another example, when we want to analyze a gene set, usually we need to identify what is the shared biological function of such group of genes, and also we want to we also want the language model to explain, okay, how the genes collectively support such functions. So essentially, for this presentation of such information, it requires a decision of like what information you want to include. For instance, like what is the number of genes you want to include to describe each group of the cells, and what other, like, do you want to include some statistics? Do you want to include some additional context, such as which species, which conditions, which disease state such a cell are collected from? So essentially, all of these are, at least in some of the application, find it's kind of critical to make the language model behave as the way we want. And also, we mentioned about how to write a good prompt, how to arrange your context. Also, the chatbot alone, such as the ChatGPT, they can perform the more sophisticated biomedical actions because they don't have a good environment, such as they cannot train or make some use of machine learning models or linear models. They don't have the access to a well-curated database such as NCBI, such as PubMed here, and also it cannot do a rigorous statistical analysis the way as we want it to be. So in order to equip the language model with a wide collections of the action space, we usually come up with a few strategies. The first strategy is to predefine a lot of tools. So this is like a kind of the example we build in the work called Biomedical. We essentially let a language model read a lot of preprints or published papers from all the subjects under the bioRxiv, like 25 different subjects. And we let the language model to read them and to summarize what are the most frequently used tools in this subject of biomedicine. And then we collect them, summarize them, and to convert them into the fragment of the codes to represent such tools. So it can be Python, it can be Bash, it can be R, and it's not only some computation tools, it also can be some database, it also can be some just command line tools. So so by doing so, it's essentially the language models are not only be able to answer simple questions, to annotate like the cell or the gene set, but also to call the tools to retrieve the database, or to doing some calculations, or to doing some statistical test in order to do a more sophisticated task that could lead to a better discovery. And also there are some similar efforts such as Tool Universe, Deploy Master, and the recent preprint called Verbench, which are developed by folks from Broad Institute and Anthropic. So besides, or in addition to these predefined programming tools, there's a more common paradigm is to just let the agent write the code themselves. So it's called, this paradigm is called coding as actions. So this essentially is developed by the folks from UIUC. They essentially showing that, okay, if you can, if the language models, they're already very good at coding, if you can, and they can, for many simple tasks, they can just write the code themselves, such as retrieve a database, essentially write the code themselves to retrieve NCBI database nowadays. And it offers, as you can imagine, much more flexibility as well as sometimes also token efficiency. So this is kind of the design we have in most of our recent agent work. It's shared by Biomedical, Spatial, Oren, and also the recent released Cloud Science. So this is a paradigm. This is a paradigm from the work we collaborate with Tony Corey's lab on scaling the aging hypothesis generation. So essentially, you can see that we provide no tools to the agent, but just like the description on what statistical test we want to have. So the agent will, for each geo experiment, the agent will have the access to the agent clocks we pre-calculated, as well as the experimental descriptions and the metadata. So it will decide itself on how to group the data and what statistical analysis it can be used, and what conclusion it can be drawn from such statistical numbers. So after the tool use, after the coding, nowadays, or at least in the recent half a year, people are find, okay, the agents can essentially operate themselves alone on your computer, on the entire computer environment. It happens that the agent can help you write the email and send them automatically, can help you monitor what's happening on a certain website. And in our scenario, in the context of biomedical discovery, we find, okay, it's essentially very helpful because many software, they don't have a very good coding interface, such as the software we use to operate on the microscope, or the software we use to, such as to handle the liquid handler, or doing some other, on some other robotic labs. So this is why we inspire us to build a framework called Oren. It essentially have like two agents. One is just in charge of writing a lot of code, doing a lot of tasks, and the other is just to do a lot of software manipulation. So this, such as move the mouse to the certain area, click, and drag the region. So here's the video demo of how such agent system operate in the real time. Well, it might be accelerated because it's always requires some time for the language model to respond. But essentially, it will be able to load the data itself, select the regions, do the segmentations, or sometimes doing some, such as tumor mutation burden readout, such as certain markers readout, such as Ki67, which is usually the same we use to track the cancer progression. Yeah, so this essentially just operate autonomously. The agent will select the region and drag the menu, select the options, and adjust the values, and to have certain readouts. And the technique behind it is it's more sophisticated than is shown here. It's essentially because, as you can imagine, the agent fail very easily for these complex graphical tasks. So we essentially have a setting of memories, have a setting of self-involved, so it will note down what errors or what exploration it has tried. So in its next round of exploration, only in the next round of its operation, it will avoid the trivial tasks, the trivial errors it has faced before. So After the tools, another element in such harness is called skills. This is also become popular at least for a year, and there's different contents when we describing a skill. Sometimes we use, but essentially it's general for under this structure. You have a name for the skill, have some like a few sentence to describe what the skill is used for. Sometimes the skill can be describing like how to use the software, because some software, Self-Profiler is very popular in analyzing the cell images, but there are many other softwares that are not that popular in terms of the material that they use to train the language model. So as you can imagine, the language model cannot use their software very well. So essentially, you want to provide more context. You want to provide a skill to tell the agent, to tell the language model how to use such software. What are the common functions? What are the menus? So on and so on. And sometimes we also use a skill to give our best domain knowledge of how to operate on certain tasks, such as you want to design a panel, you want to annotate the spatial data, you want to doing patient stratification. What is a typical way people are doing this in order to avoid the agent just to do some very trivial solutions or workflows. So this is what we use the skill in the spatial agent. And as you can see in the top sub-figure, which essentially using the skill won't let the agent lose the flexibility. So this is a similar setting of design the panel. One is with design the panel from the scratch. Another is design the panel given a previous human scientist design. And the agent will retrieve the same skill, but will have a different chains of actions. So as you can imagine, the skills is just to provide a better know-how, but without losing the flexibility of the agent to execute, to choose the actions it wants to do the tasks. And also, as we're shown in the bottom, you can see that having a skill, which is spatial agent, which is the orange-ish color bar on the left, on the most right of each subfigure, will help it to achieve a better performance under different metrics compared with Biomedical or the GPT cell type, which essentially doesn't have such additional context of how to do the annotation tasks. So as you can see in the Biomedical, it has much larger variance across, like here is 5 different rounds. So sometimes it will achieve a very good performance. Sometimes it will just, here is annotating the hard tissue, so it will just annotate every single cell as the cardiomyocyte cells, which essentially is a very suboptimal solution. But later on, as you can imagine, so later on, there's a trend in the community about scaling the skills, and it's very easy to scale this textual description with the help of language models. But later on, we find that there's some questions, or there's some thinkings about what is a good skill, like what kind of detail do you want the skill to be, and are the skills not always necessary for all the tasks. So here, as we're showing here, like for the top row, which essentially design a panel, we find that the benefit that brought by skill is very negligible. Sometimes it could be negative. However, for like a certain hard tasks, such as annotating a spatial data, it's having some skills, including like a crucial step, which is essentially like a transfer some transcriptomic profile from a single cell to the spatial, is usually helpful with annotating like a Murphy-ish or coarse mix data set, which usually don't have a whole transcriptomic expression profiles. So here we just want to say that skills is not always necessary, and many skills, especially those are without rigorous evaluations that are directly generated by large language models sometimes are quite harmful. So far we talk about some elements in the harness engineering. We talk about how to write prompt, and the community has changed from like 2 years ago. We talk about some ideas on how to arrange the content. We talk about the necessity of the skills. We talk about how to make the tools, how to make the agent just write the coding themselves, and the capability of use the softwares is additional to the tool use and codings. So to head it to the shining stars we care about, which here represent the discovery that are beneficial, besides this engineering efforts around the reasoning large language models, we still have at least 2 other elements we need to solve. First is rigorous evaluation. The second is validations. So we've been thinking about this a lot. Is like whenever you develop something, you want to do a lot of evaluation to show, okay, your design is better than some other folks' design in the past. So what is a good evolve for the science agent? At least we want your agent design will outperform the best existing computation tools. So not only the large language model based, it can be statistical based, it can be deep learning based, it can be like a heuristic or rule-based tools. And you also want to show your own agent is better than some generic agents such as ChatGPT, such as Cloud Code. Otherwise, the agent we build is meaningless. And the second point is of the good evolve is that we want the agent we build or the harness we build could consistently improve no matter which language model you're using, no matter it's open source, no matter it's closed source, no matter it's from OpenAI, no matter it's from Google. So we want your design, or we want the harness we build have such consistent improvement compared with the simple question and answering with the same language models. And also, the golden standard or the golden evaluation is always we want to show that the agents we build can make some meaningful discovery and that can be validated. And there's, so this is just a few more specific examples of building evolves. It starts from like simple tasks that can be easily verified, such as coding. You will know whether your current program has passed the test or not. You will know whether your answer to the math problem, whether 1 + 1 is equal to 2 or not, whether there's like a 3R in the word strawberry. It's something very easy to verify. Later on, people nowadays are using a more sophisticated evaluation pipeline, such as to write a very detailed rubrics of a very open-ended problem. So this is like a one snapshot or one example question from the Life Science Bench, which is released by OpenAI a few months ago, which essentially, as you can see in the right column here, is essentially there's a expert written rubrics of how to score the agent's response. It's like if you cover the first part, you will get like 18% of a score. If you cover the second part, you will get a few more scores. So this is, as you can see, it's become more sophisticated and more systematic. But this such language model-based judge or the expert rubric-based evaluation has its own issues. So this is what we found in our experiment is like using the same standard, using the same response, but with different language model judges, they will give you different scores. Even all the input are the same, the scoring standard are the same, but still they will give you different scores. So this is something I think the community still haven't have a good solution to deal with. And also there are some ongoing efforts of building new evaluations, new benchmarking, and I'm in part on some of them. And there's like 2 generic directions of building the next generation of benchmarks. First is to make the agent lost in very long horizon executions. For instance, if you can design a task, which the agent will need to look up website, need to visit some database, write the coding, take a snapshot of the software, and to understand them and to iterate. So one of such example in this section is called Agents Last Exam, which is developed by Berkeley folks. It's essentially involve a lot of compound actions and make the agents more challenging to finish the entire long run. And the second direction of designing new benchmark is to trap the agent to make very silly or wrong decisions at the beginning. So this is something we baked in the terminal bench. It's kind of fun. It's like for some errors our human never made, they still need to. The language model sometimes still very easily to fall in the error category. But for, let's say, a very sophisticated coding tasks, it's sometimes can usually down them in one shot. So in the direction of this with the example like a terminal bench size, we essentially try a lot of different tasks and to find, okay, some of the tasks the agent can make wrong plans at the beginning. Although it can execute every single step of the plan correctly, but with a wrong plan, the result is not correct. And the similar examples around this direction have example like Biomedical, which is a benchmark released by Anthropic also a few months ago. And also there's more thinking about some elements are necessary or not, such as, in my view, like a reinforced learning based training sometimes are necessary, but if we can equip the frontier models, the most best models, with a proper amount of knowledge, such as skills, such as a database, it's usually can outperform some models we do in some small scale reinforced learning training. And also another necessary design in my mind is sometimes it might be not necessary is to do ablations. So this is essentially like we got asked, or usually quite often from the reviewers, like, okay, why not try this? Why not try that? Why not remove this module in your agents? Why not remove that modules and to see how it perform? So this is like one of the ablations we got asked from the reviewer, which is like trying to change the temperature, the output temperature from the large language models. Essentially, the temperature here represents like how random or stochasticity when the language models generate the response. And as you can show in here is like for the same model, no matter under various metrics, the effects of the temperature usually is very small, especially for the recent models such as Sonnet 4.5 or Gemini 3 Pro. It might still have some visible changes for previous models such as GPT-4o, because back then the model are not small enough and it's a bit sensitive to our input context, to our input prompts and its output parameters. But for the recent models, such ablations, we find it's not that necessary. And also it's kind of like the similar facts or the similar report findings that are shared by AlphaFold. If you look at the hundreds of the pages of the review response in the AlphaFold tool, it's essentially showing that, okay, a lot of design removal, adding them only have like a 5%-ish improvements or changes in the final score, while the entire the entire design itself has been like 30% better than the second best for the same leaderboard. And also like a virtual lab, which essentially people ask, okay, adding more agents or remove more agents, will it make a difficult and our folks, which is from James Doe's lab at Stanford, basically showing that, okay, such ablations are not that sensitive to the final performance. They're more like an entire design matters, but every single element, because they are mostly chained to each other, so adding a twist of one of them could have a not that visible effect to your final performance. So we talk about like evaluations, like different aspects of doing evals, and also some elements that still debating whether they are necessary in terms of evil that the evals told us. And the second part of making the discovery is called validations. And there's various strategies of making validations. Some are dry, some are wet. Here I just list a few categories and hope, and with some examples in our work, and hope it might, I don't know, like help you organize strategies for your own work, hopefully. The first strategy to do validation is to let the agent run, operate on some existing public data set, and to say, okay, whether it can recover the existing findings, as well as to disclose some new insights. So here is the example. We let the Biomedical run a multi-ohm human skeleton development atlas. We essentially showing that the agent managed to identify some novel transcription factors that are backed by the data and has not reported by the literature, at least for the human species, but for some other species, this similar gene with slightly different names have shown some regulatory functions to the skeleton development. And the second strategy of doing validation is to let the agent to design some experiments, and the experimentalist doing such experiment and showing that, okay, such design are useful and also helpful for some later stage discovery. So this is like an example from spatial agent, where that's the agent to design a panel for collecting the spatial data. Here specifically use Xenium, developed by 10x to collect the mouse model tissues that are with prostate cancer progression and metastasis as some samples. And we're basically showing that, okay, the genes proposed by the agents can recover the tissue characteristics, can recover the cancer progressions, as well as some are useful to define the inflammatory states of the cancer-associated fibroblast. The third strategy of doing such validation is to design some mechanism of actions experiments to validate the agent hypothesis. So this is the work we described at the very beginning of scaling the agent discovery, the agent hypothesis discovery. So we essentially let the agent to run a lot of statistical tests across a wide collection of interventions. Some of them are physiology, some of them are with small molecule or with some more genetic perturbation as well. So essentially, one of these significant interventions that are showing by the numbers calculated by the agents, we basically design later experiment to showing that, okay, treat the mouse models with this small molecule will make the mouse lose the hair as well as reduce the lifespan. So this is essentially what we do is to design a follow-up MOA experiment to verify what the agent have been proposed. And the last strategy to do the validation is to check whether the agent's finding is happening in other similar system. So this is like the examples we have for the agent that can operate on some software. Essentially, what we find is like the agent find, okay, knock out BRCA5 genes or knock out some fecal adhesion gene pathways will cause some phenotypic change. Here is more like the area of the cell as well as the mitochondrial intensity of the cell will cause such phenotypic changes. And this is originally the agent's find while it exploring the JUMP dataset, which is collected on the cell line of U2OS. And we later check whether such finding will transfer to some other cell lines, other kinds of cell lines, such as A549 and DLD1, which we collected in-house in parallel with the JUMP dataset at Genentech, and we basically showing that okay, the agent finding in some other system can be recapitulated in some similar system, but has not been reported before. So this is kind of the strategies that we find. Okay, maybe it's useful to show that, to validate the things that our discover agent can be useful. And this second part, as we said, is one slide. Is about what's happening now. There's many things happening now, especially maybe the last few days on the Twitter is about some open source model that have very, very good coding capability. And in terms of the biomedical agents, what's happening now is like, we find that the model is eating the harness. What does it mean? Is like the models themselves become much more smarter. When we nowadays interact with ChatGPT online, if you look at them, it can essentially look up the database themselves. They can search online themselves. We don't need to provide such predefined tools to them anymore. It can do a much better job. It can do a similar good job alone. So this is what we have, what we describe as model is eating the harness. A lot of our previous designs seems to be redundant, sometimes harmful to the language models that are widely used nowadays. And also we're observing a lot of the companies that are training this language model, they're trying to bake a capability called self-involving into the current and the next generation of the language models. What does it mean? It's like they encourage the model to have the capability to improve some computation models, some computation tools by trying to adjust a lot of modules, trying to adjust a lot of parameters. Because and this is kind of the sense we're observing for every single recently released technical report from this new language models. And I just listed here because I think it is kind of beneficial for help us when we to design the future agents, because you can use them to try to improve the existing tools. Maybe you can use them to improve AlphaFold, and you can have AlphaFold 3.1 or something that has better scores than AlphaFold 3. Because these language models are now capable or encouraged to have the capability to doing such algorithm involving. And also, as we shown, discussed the recent released benchmarks, a lot of things, a lot of companies that develop this language model, they are collecting a lot of domain scientist input science tasks. So they're scaling the expert to do the annotations, to design the rubrics in order to make their model much better than on these discovery tasks. And last, there are some open questions, which I don't know how to deal with them, but I guess maybe after half a year, there will be some solutions for this questions. The first is what makes a good evolve. There's always going to be good evolves because currently people are kind of finding a way to climb the hills as long as the hills are clearly defined. So it will be endless game. The people who propose evils, the people who climb such evils and propose the next generation evils. So what would be the next generation evils be? Is something we don't have a clearly answers. So one of the principle is we don't want to release something that the current model is already very good at or saturated. We want to design something that are realistic, also challenging, that the models cannot do them very well at the current stage. And the second point for the open question is how to do this memory or this knowledge engineering, because as we said, a lot of the tools are not necessary anymore. But still, many things the agent cannot do them well. How to organize still the useful knowledge, or how to assign the life cycle for the knowledge, because maybe as the next generation of the model, they don't need this knowledge anymore, but they still need another bunch of other knowledge in order to do a similar good on the tasks. And also the last is something I don't have any clue to deal with it at all. As you can imagine, as people are now more and more use or play with these language models, we centralize the way we do analysis, the way we do science. So how to encourage such diversity or creativity in, let's say, the agents is I believe it would be very beneficial. Is like we don't want Newton alone. We want Newton, Einstein, and Dirac, and many other great physicists. And they don't disagree with, and they don't always agree with each other. So they have, debating and also have different beliefs. But the current agents, they don't have such things. They always fall into the similar workflow for the similar task. This is something maybe we want to have more inspired solutions. So overall, the design principle, back to the title, is about recipe of building agents. There's a few points we listed here. We want the design to be as simple as possible. We don't want to over-decorate the agents we build, because as we said, the model is eating the harness. The model themselves have become more and more capable and smart. So we want to do beneficial add-on, not just decorative designs. And I always believe always better to build on the best models, because currently we observe that the newer models will always be better than the current one and cheaper. So if your design is still on the models that are released a year ago, a lot of findings, a lot of principles, conclusions you discover may be totally useless for the current and future models. And also always to do a very comprehensive check, to do a comprehensive evals, to do different ways of validations, and always ideally to target some open problems that are not well resolved today. And finally, I want to thank my mentors and thank you all for here, and happy to take questions.
Questions? There's one in the back there. Go ahead, Ann.
Hi. Yeah, it's Ann. So my question is kind of about scale, and I understand the need for I understand the idea of the lightweight harness, but where as NIH or NLM or NCBI, a lot of the things that we have are, sources of truth, or at least best references. How do we scale harnessing to that level? I can see it in the individual skill or in a single MCP, but thinking about how to apply that even across NCBI I have no idea how we could do that effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it requires a lot of strategic thinking about this. Is like how to build a better or complementary infrastructure from the efforts of NLM or other departments of NIH to meet the requirements of these. So to be honest, I'm not very familiar with all the existing products or ongoing efforts here. I would say for sure you want something to be more digitalized. You want them to organize maybe in the similar data format or database formats that make them more easier for the language model to retrieve, to understand. You don't want different databases have entirely total different searching behavior or query format. Yeah. Yeah, that's my best try.
No, that's great. Thank you. I can always hope for a silver bullet, but that was helpful.
Renee?
Hi, great talk. It's good to see you at NLM. So I have two questions. One is related to one of your tool, and the other is more philosophical and general, like wanting to hear your kind of thoughts. So the first one is regarding to the tool you discussed about the spatial analysis. So you have tools to design spatial panel, like gene panels for spatial experiments. So you utilize these agentic workflow and trying to pull in the literature and ask the AI to do the work for us. But I'm wondering, in your design of the agentic workflow, have you put into the designing considerations from the experimental protocols itself? Because in general, there are two big categories of spatial transcriptomics experiment. One is imaging-based, and the other is transcriptome-based. These two are two very different approaches of doing spatial experiments, and each of them has its own pros and cons. And of course, regarding to these technical differences, there will be different considerations need to be taken into account when designing the panel. So one question is regarding to what considerations, and in general, how do you balance the specificity of designing a panel and generalizability when you have the agentic AI to do this type of work for bench scientists or collaboration?
Okay. I'm not very sure I get the full question, but I will just generate the sense that come to my mind. Yeah, I mean, for sure, here there's imaging-based, there's spot-based, also for annotation as well. Sometimes you need to do deconvolution first because it's spot-based. Sometimes you just annotation them directly. So especially for the panel here, when we design the skills, the tricks we do is we use some general agents such as Colloquia, such as ChatGPT, such as Biomedical, which has a lot of tools. We let it to run the same task maybe for 100 times, and we select the best 5 or 10 runs, and we look at what tools they're using, what plans they're using, and we see, okay, if we can extract some of the best know-how, such as the best tools that can organize a skill. So in order make sure the rest of 90 runs will also produce the top 10 level performance. So one of the tools we find is very useful is called validate target tissue expression, which essentially is to validate the genes you nominated, and there's a database to verify, okay, the genes have some certain amount of expression level in such tissues you care about. If it's too high or too low, it's something we don't want. And this is essentially, it's not that perfect. That is why here we have a human especially to design the panel for the imaging-based Xenium, we need to manually remove some highly overexpressed genes.
That's exactly what I want to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
There is something called optical crowding. That's from the technical limitations of the imaging kind of optical platforms.
Yeah, it's always a trade-off. For instance, on one side, you want to give it as much knowledge, as much consideration of every single aspect as possible, as much as possible. But on the other side, you also want to have its own autonomy as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So it's always a trade-off.
Yeah, good to know, good to know. My second question is more kind of philosophical. I mean, in the era of large language model, do you think there's large enough literature body that can kind of fine-tune or fit the large language models with billions of parameters?
I'm not very sure I understand. So let me paraphrase, is like you were asking, do we have enough literature to fine-tune a model that can make them very good on the literature?
Yes, because my kind of why I ask is thinking about like any GPT or other any large language models. You have versions of large language models have like say 60 billion parameter version and some version with fewer number of parameters. But thinking about 6 billion parameters, use natural language like from everywhere from the web. There might be enough language to fine tune. But do you think in the scientific literature or scientific related field, there's enough scientific language to fine tune the 6 billion parameters?
I mean, currently they're already very good at literature search. I remember maybe like a year ago, they still do a lot of hallucination on the reference, but nowadays for every link you click them on, especially like a ChatGPT Pro or mostly ChatGPT Pro. I mean, Gemini still hallucinates a lot. It can always point you to the accurate reference with accurate descriptions. So yeah, I mean, I would say fine-tune them, especially on the literature, maybe a bit suboptimal, because this is also something this Frontier Lab is also trying to spend a lot of budget on. Also, you don't have the computational resource as well as the knowledge to do such things. You need to try a lot, waste a lot of electricity and GPU hours. That might be very suboptimal compared with you just equipped it with a very well organized external database for it to retrieve and generate some response. Maybe that would be a better and easier thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. One is, well, first of all, thank you for the very interesting talk. Really enjoy it. The first question is, you mentioned in one of your slides that when you use a different large language models as a judge, they tend to disagree with each other. In fact, in our own research, we found very similar findings, but I just wonder if you have dig deeper and to see why they differ in your specific examples. So that's my first question. And my second question is, for the agentic AI framework that you presented, I wonder how do you see a human expert play a role in that pipeline to really accelerate discovery versus, are you talking about end-to-end automated discovery by agents? So those are those are the two questions I have. Thanks.
Thanks. I know Joy. Jill. I know who's the life science OpenAI. I ask her the same question. The answer is no idea, or they don't have a good, elegant solution. So if you look at their technical report, it's like every time they report, their model improve some level on their benchmark, they always use the same judge. They always use the same model as a judge. They don't care about other judges. I'm also not very sure about the intrinsic reason. They are all black box models. I guess maybe we don't write enough detailed description for the rubric, or maybe it is the models will have different understanding of whether they capture the rubric we mentioned, giving the same response. I don't have a very elegant solution at all. Probably it's always better to just to stick to one or two your favorite models, use them as a judge always, and try to see the solution you propose can be improved or not. The second question is, I think it's already happened in the math. It's like we don't have enough mathematicians to verify the proof that are generated by the agents. we already lack of the, because, there's only, for very specific domain of the math, we don't have enough expert in that domain, and also have the time, they don't have the time to review every agent, because it usually, at most takes a few hours for the agent to generate 100 pages proof, but maybe require half a month or a few months to verify by a very talented, well-trained mathematician. Maybe it's easier for biomedicine, because biomedicine many of the findings are descriptive and data-driven or data-supported. So as long as it's supported by the data, then the findings are very easy to verify than things like math. I think it's also like, as we said, it's the endless and evolving process of persuade autonomy. At the current stage, we probably still like more fancier about the agent doing all the things together from the beginning till the end, from the user high-level instruction till give you some report or some findings. Still, we are doing this, but later on, probably it will evolve into a paradigm where the human has more engagement or have more involvement as well. Maybe happen, maybe not happen. For instance, like coding, I don't think we will going back to, you still have a round of interaction with like a color code. Nowadays, I don't, as long as it generates the results, seems to be good, seems to follow the science I understand. I don't look back to every single line of code is written. Probably, yeah, I'm not very sure which direction it will be for the science agents. Will be more autonomy or will be more human engagement? Probably, yeah, fair chance on both directions.
Thank you again for the great talk. So one of the questions I have has to do with, oftentimes we're not just interested in discoveries. What we really want is understanding. What we really are looking for is, well, in mathematics or in computer science, when you're building something or when you're building a proof, either it works or it doesn't, or roughly. There's so many things in biology and frankly the rest of science that they're fuzzy. There's uncertainty inherent in everything, and at the end of it, what we really want is we want something that would allow us to look at what conditions these discoveries hold. What are the limitations of the experiment, not just as a formality, but actually truly understanding that. And of course, there's even more superficial levels of uncertainty that these agents really should be communicating as well. How can we get it to a point where it's not just doing one arc of probably useful work, but actually helping understand those conditions and that limitations and all of those layers of uncertainty, not just one little arc of thread of useful, beginning to end, it works. If that makes sense.
I'm not very sure what you want, but speak of the drafting limitation. This is kind of the honestly speaking. I'm always not good at drafting limitation for every work I authored. So nowadays I just use ChatGPT to help me draft the limitations. They can always draft a very rigorous descriptions. Okay, they can always easily identify. Okay. The examples you done here is very specialized for these mouse models. It cannot represent the general population of the mouse. Needless to say about the potential translational impact on the human beings. So it can already doing such descriptions super well to describe what are the limitations of your current study, what the limitations of your experiments. Yeah, but if you're asking like more like a like verbalize the confidence, like how the agent is how certain the agent is about its workflow, about its actions. This is we have some explorations on that. Sometimes they are very well calibrated. Sometimes they are very overconfident. They are always very blindly believe themselves to do the things they done. I don't have a good solution for that. It's the same thing. It's like I only have the observation. I know this is something that are not be perfectly calibrated. It's not be perfectly resolved. Yeah, I'm also not very sure whether it's a totally bad thing or it's something positive as well, because scientists sometimes they're always stubborn and they believe themselves. It's like you believe the light speed has an upper bound no matter which thing you're propagating. It's stubborn. It's for sure blindly belief, but also forms the theory of relativity. So yeah. I'm not very sure to answer your questions.
You have your majority system here on screen, but a new discovery in any domain is always a minority discovery, one guy against everybody else. If I write a new bioinformatics tool to do anything, and if all tools so far don't give the result, I have one tool giving the correct result, and all others are against it. So by definition, the majority never gives an advance.
I'm not very sure I understand the question. What you mean?
By definition,
Yeah.
you have n tools doing something not correctly, then you develop one new tool that probably does it correctly, maybe.
Yeah.
It's always 1 against n, so it's always the minority who finds the advance, never the majority. So your system here can never make a new discovery in a way.
Yeah, I mean, that is very philosophical. It's like, wow, I mean, if we just talk about evaluation, like majority votes is kind of the widely commonly used design we use. Is like, for sure you have a lot of judges, you just more believe the general wisdom compared with the margin, which I mean, for sure, sometimes the margin is correct. I don't have a good number or a good estimation about how much the general or the majority vote is more correct. I just blindly use the most other folks used. Is like sometimes we have, like, so for instance, multiple predictors, and we have an ensemble of them, and we mostly use the most predicted, mostly common to predict carrier of your final prediction. It's not perfect. Nothing is perfect, but sometimes it's useful. So,
Thank you.
Great talk. Thank you so much. So I'm wondering, when you're building or scaffolding around the large language models to build your skills or tools, how are you interacting with these models through the interface, like the web or cloud, like for example, the cloud app, or are you interacting through the APIs? And then I wonder what's the budget? It seems like might be using a lot of tokens. Like, what's the budget for building these tools?
I mean, build agents, we usually use APIs. I use their web portal a lot, but mostly, check the message. For instance, I ask, like, when is electricity is invented, this is through the chat interaction with the chat GPT. But for building agent, we usually use API because it has much higher rate limits. You can have intensive amounts of token generated or input within seconds. I think nowadays, because thanks to the computation, there's no monopoly at the current moment. So the price, I would say, is favorable. In order to make the science agent to finish a task, maybe sometimes like $3, sometimes like $5, to annotate a data set that has 200,000 cells. So it's not that big compared with, folks are saying, okay, I'm using coding agent and I have spent like a 10K per day. Usually come from employee at some tire companies. It's not that high.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you all so much for joining us today. We've reached our time. Thank you, Hanchen, and thank everyone for coming online.
Thank you.